Hello, everybody. Welcome to my presentation that deals with Black Lives Matter, Museums Respond. Let me open my presentation. Here we go. The abstract for my paper examines the responses from museums around the globe to the BLM movement protest that took place during the COVID-19 pandemic, and while most of the world was under lockdown. The main finding that will be presented in the paper is that generally museums express solidarity with the movement. Museums widely denounced racism and were honest about their complacency in systems that perpetuated racism. However, some museums were criticized about their hollow, self-aggrandising or too little, too late responses. As background, BLM was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal decision in the Trayvon Martin murder case. The movement gained traction worldwide after the brutal killing of George Floyd in the US. During the BLM protest, much anger was directed against the statues which memorialized contentious historical figures. Museums and their collections also came under the spotlight for the role they played in institutionalizing racism. I examine how the BLM movement will likely affect museums post-COVID, and also look at the ways in which some museums are recording this new phase of our social history. These findings suggest that the BLM movement has been instrumental in triggering a self-introspection process which museums are undergoing about their role in a post-pandemic society. Museums are making commitments to do better and to become more inclusive as we enter this new cultural epoch. Why was the BLM movement important? It happened over a sustained period. The protest started on the 26th of May 2020 and went on for more than a month, well into July. The timing of the protest was during a world pandemic. So people were supposed to be self-isolating at home with their families. And here's an issue that became so important that worldwide people came out to march about these human rights abuses. The scale, the reach. Some studies show that over 7 million people in the US alone participated. Some stats are a little bit higher, moving it closer to 15 million. There was international solidarity for the movement. And people are saying it may be the largest movement in the US. It was a global human rights movement. It spoke to issues of colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, racism, human rights abuses, things that people are dealing with throughout the world. It was the tipping point. It set in motion widespread social and political change. There's been proposed legislative changes. A lot has changed since this movement, and there's been promises of changes, and people are more alert and alive to what's going on around them. We talk about the social media influences. We say the revolution shall be tweeted, liked, and shared. If you look at the video of George Floyd being killed and crying for his mama, that's exactly what happened. It was circulated around the world. There wasn't any time for anybody to control the message around that. An important quote I picked up in the New York Times from Omar Wassa, who's a professor. He says part of what social media does is allow us to see a reality that has been entirely visible to some people and invisible to others. As those injustices become visible, meaning change follows. And that's exactly what has happened here. Here's two social media posts I put up for you, which talks to museums' responses. Some museums were early responders. They responded very quickly to the protest, and some museums didn't respond as quickly, and they were criticized for not responding to the protest timelessly. And then you found there was follow-up where museums put up a lot of statements, etc. Now, if you look at the Brooklyn Art Museum that I put up the social media post, you can see thousands of protesters dressed in white rallied outside the museum in nationwide protests about 2 Black transgender murders, which was very much linked to the BLM movement at the time. We also then had the Seattle Art Museum. They posted out a blacked out image, which I showed you earlier, of Black Lives Matter, and said their museum will join colleagues from the art sector in a march for social justice and equity. And they provided the details of the march. They were very much actively involved in what was going on. The Rhode Island Art Museum there, I showed you earlier, posted a photo of protesters outside the museum, and they thanked the Providence for showing up. So obviously you could see they were very much involved with what's happening, actively taking part. I've put up some other social media posts for you. Here you can see the Philadelphia Art Museum. They scheduled a particular session there. You can see the picture of a person with the George Floyd t-shirt, I Can't Breathe there. And they were gathering the jazz community around to discuss and to unite around the issues that people were marching on. There's an image of the Wexler Gallery, and they bought for their collections an artwork that dealt with the expulsion of Colin Kaepernick and John Brown, which was quite an important BLM issue as well. And here's an image, social media post here that deals with the University of Oregon's Jordan Schnitzer Museum. And they also encourage the BLM movement by offering a grant for artists to express or to create art around BLM. Here's an important quote on the top there, if I could just move that image. It says, "The world had become focused on statues as powerful and hurtful symbols of systemic racism." That quote was in the New York Times, and it was said by the president of the American Museum of Natural History. And they had taken a decision to remove the Theodore Roosevelt equestrian statue that depicted Roosevelt on horseback with him flanked by a Native American and an African American. And in his support for this, the New York mayor also commented on the removal, saying that the statue depicted Black and Indigenous people as subjugated and racially inferior. Now, this was quite an important issue at the time, and it was many years in the coming. I'd also like you to look at the commentary from Chris Anagnos. He's executive director of the Association of Art Museum Directors. And what he said was, as a community, I do not think art museums have done enough. We have dabbled around the edges of the work, but in our place of privilege, we will never live up to the statement that museums are for everyone, unless we begin to confront, examine, and dismantle the various structures that brought us to this point. Also here, there was a hashtag that was created by museums. Museums are not neutral, to respond to the issues around the BLM protests at the time. You could see that ICOM also came out with a statement, museums are not neutral. They were reflecting and admitting to the criticisms that were thrown at museums at the time. They say they have the responsibility and the duty to fight racial injustice and anti-Black racism at all levels. And also another important thing that was tweeted by ICOM is an article entitled "Calls for National Museum to Document UK's Role in Slave Trade." There was quite a widespread condemnation of the National Museum there in the UK. And ICOM says the Black Lives Matter protest and the toppling of the Edward Colston statue have fueled demands that Britain face up to its colonial past. The museum educating people about the country's role in the slave trade is seen as one way of helping to do that. So here's a call, and ICOM's responding to it and agreeing to the fact that it's important that these issues of colonialism and the role museums played should not be swept under the carpet, but brought to the fore. Here's another image I pulled through, and this is a social media post showing a cutout banner which the Jewish Museum in Portland put up, and they're saying that the white supremacists cut out the word black from there, and they're calling for donations so that another banner could be put up there. There's a response from the Tate Museum, very important. If I read out the first paragraph, it says, "We have a platform, a voice, and a duty to our members, employees, artists, visitors, and followers to speak up and stand for human rights and anti-racism. Nobody should have to live in fear because of the color of their skin." During the protest, there was a lot of issues around museum staff, and some museum staff had been fired, black staff had been fired, lack of representation, lack of black museum curators. All these issues came to the fore, and museums were talking and speaking out about it, responding to the criticisms. One of the important things about the protest is it was such an important protest. There was quite significant items that should have been collected, and it called to the fore the museum's role in responding, because there was a race against time to collect these pieces of historic protest. The businesses during the protest were boarded up with boards to protect against damage, and the artist at the time decided to use the boards as blank canvases to create very powerful street art. Black Lives Matter protest art became quite an important way to express themselves. There were some stunning art pieces, and as people were collecting these artworks, because things were happening so quickly, artworks needed to be moved, and businesses needed to claim their spaces again, and ownership and questions of ownership of art. Some of the art was curated or painted by groups of people. Some people didn't know who painted the artwork, and it became quite an issue about ownership and who should acquire it. And museums in the US moved to acquire these artworks for themselves. As you know, museums need to keep a historic record of these protests. They need to be collecting as many objects as possible from the protests, so that they can in the future tell people about the protests, do research on the protests, etc. So the traditional role of museums is to collect representatives' items of these key events and preserve them for future generations, to study them, to publish about them, to hold exhibitions, etc. Now, this is quite an important process. We have street art, which is quite a valid form of art that gets studied. And we found, there were stunning artworks done by street artists. I picked up a few that I found quite interesting and posted it here. You can see this is a post on Instagram from the artist, and he talks about his artwork. And he gives his artist statement. He says, why did he do it? What is it representing? What would he like to see changed? And there were quite a number of these. Here's an artwork done of Breonna Taylor. And you look at the artwork and the way she's depicted in the artwork as a strong heroine and a hero of the movement, because as a result of their deaths, which were not in vain, they spurred such a massive movement and drew such attention to these issues that have been around for decades in the US and throughout the world. And once again, you can see the artist puts an art statement which is then available for students to study, art students to study later, for academia to use later. It's all out there and it's all available. Here's a mural done to George Floyd, as well as the some other people that also have been victims of racism and police brutality in America. I've just got one more, which I thought is quite important. This is one from Syria, also a mural, also showing international solidarity. But what's quite interesting about this is the background. If you look at a bigger picture of this mural and the area it's in, you can see it's a war-torn area. Buildings have collapsed. There's nothing there, and yet these people, because of they also have experienced human rights abuses and lost a lot. They're showing international solidarity with the movement, and they're creating a mural, to George Floyd, and it has become quite an important rallying for people that have experienced human rights abuses throughout the world. Another important thing before I move on to this is your St. Thomas University actually have created a art database, which is virtual. And this database is available for anybody free of charge, and it's curated by everybody. It's sort of a crowd share museum, a virtual museum, and it's a street art museum. It's collecting images of street art that took place during the George Floyd BLM protest throughout the world. And what they're doing is they're collecting the artist's statement, they're identifying the artist, finding out what is the artwork about, and getting people's views about the artwork, so that there is this database that's collating all these artworks and available for people. This is quite interesting because we as museums, we are not able to respond and react as quickly as has been done with this virtual database. It's an international database, and it's going to change how museums respond and react, because people do expect museums to be the keepers of truth, to be trustworthy institutions, and to reflect all of these. And yet we don't have the capacity to respond. We would need to get funding, we would need to get political will, permissions, etc. And here we find a virtual museum that has been created. It has a trust of everybody because it's an open to everybody. Everybody can curate, everybody can express their views on there. So it's changing how people want museums to respond in the future. They want us to respond instantly. They want us to be honest of what's happening. I'm just going to move this so that you can see the saying on the top there. It's quite important. It says, in this country, we're never more than 150 miles away from a looted African object. And that's quite an important saying, because the British Museum came out and expressed solidarity with the movement. And they issued a statement. Here's a social media post. You can see it says, the British Museum stands in solidarity with the Black community throughout the world. Black Lives Matter. And there was instant lashing of the British Museum by many commentators. There was a lot of criticism. I've taken two out for you. You can see this one commentator says, you can't stand in solidarity without actively examining the way museums and curatorial practices benefits from colonial systems, looting, and narrative biases. Lead by proper example. This one says, this virtue signaling exercise, one of the most prominent visible institutions of colonialism that has not made more serious and meaningful steps to actually break with its white supremacist legacy. So that became quite an important thing, where museums were being criticized either for their lack of response or for their very mild response, where they weren't directly referring to George Floyd or the BLM protests. They were posting vague references to racism or equity and not really admitting their role or confirming that they're going to address the issues and change. And they were called out. They did respond to that, and a lot of museums issued statements around this. From a South African point of view, the National Museum responded. We did a popular article that covered the protest in South Africa, and we extended our solidarity to the movement there, and also, discussed the changes that needing to take place with that. On the screen, I want to leave you with a very important sort of popular, it's a fiction, but it's based on real life, that is influencing people. It's, open discussion is taking place as a result of this. The scene deals very much with looting. You can see the Museum of Great Britain. It's a scene from the movie Black Panther, and there you see Killmonger. He's in the museum, and the director is talking to him, and she's trying to explain to him where the artifact was found and what it was about, and he corrects her, and he refers to the thorny issues around colonialism, around restitution, and the fact that these items were looted from Africa. And these are the type of issues that are very important for museums to address. People are not going to accept platitudes around this issue. They're going to be expecting museums to address these issues about colonialism, address issues around what they show, what objects they show, what interpretations are given on objects, etc. I'd like to thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to any questions that will come through later.